Welcome to ECWM506 exam revision video. What we're going to do in this video is we are going to walk through the sample question that we looked at in the lecture, and we're going to discuss what would be the expectations for you doing this exam, and how much you should be writing, what things you should look out for. So what we're going to do is we're just going to simply walk through this question again, pretty much as we did in the exam. So first of all, the format for this year is a little bit different, as in you will only get one question. So if you're looking at the past exams, for example, the other one that's on Blackboard, you'll find it's got another question which relates to the jQuery mobile and the mobile web work, whereas the new exam format is just an expanded version of the second part of that exam, and far more similar to what I'm showing you now, with some additional stuff that we'll discuss as we go along. Okay, let's get started. So first, number one, there's one question, so you don't need to worry about how many to answer. There's one question and you just answer all of it. Obviously, very crucial, you read through the question carefully before starting to write, and also make sure you make some notes as well and plan what it is you're doing. But what we're going to do is we're just going to walk through this. So essentially what you'll be given is some kind of problem similar to this. It will be some mobile application messaging platform that will require quite a few features, and these will be explained in the text, either in terms of a problem statement as we have here, or maybe put down as requirements. But it shouldn't differ too much from this. What's the thing to notice here is, straight away we should notice that we are asked to deal with both iOS and the Android platforms as well. So that's clearly going to be important somewhere in the question, one would think. Okay, so what is important is that you, when reading the question, is that you make a note of the functionality required, and you are asked to do use case diagrams. That helps, obviously. So by reading through the problem statement, the other thing is also, if you feel during the exam there's something you really don't understand, possibly because of the way the exam has been worded, then don't be afraid to put your hand up and just ask. And I don't think we won't be giving away anything just to simply explain the question to you. Obviously we can't provide answers to anything, but we can certainly make it clearer to you should you misunderstand anything. Okay, so the important thing here is that we're looking at this question. It's a messaging application, and the thing to look at immediately is things which are kind of noun in quality. For example, we've got the word here members, we have the word message, we've got audio, text, image, and so on. So we wanted to do this because we're thinking about, later on in the question we will be asked about a domain model. So it's a good idea to make a note of these things, because they almost certainly will represent one of the entities inside our domain model. So as we read through this, we realise that it's a messaging application for a climbing club. It appears that members can message other members. Administration has more functionality. For example, they can set up events as well and do other things. We can say here we've got a list of places to climb. So again, I would be making a note of place to climb. Climb reviews. This is all part of the functionality. A bit further on, or somewhere within here, I think it talks about weather as well, and some details such as that. Messages, events. Okay, importantly, also read this detail, such as if it's telling you here that the mobile application messages are handled by the backend server, the details of which do not concern you, then great, they don't concern you, so there's no need for you to detail those in any way, because obviously the question is clearly hinting that you don't need to consider that. Okay. So the other part of this question, apart from you teasing out what the functionality is from this, is there's likely to be a section relating to mobile web as well. So in this case, for this particular question, it's saying that the club has a mobile website already that just contains general information that they want to incorporate into this application. So they want to reuse these web pages inside their application in some way. So expect to be asked a question about this, and it also is quite important, this actually, to make note of this. It's saying that in this case the application is not expected to be used whilst people are climbing with it. Whatever the application you're given, it may hint or may well tell you that it's either going to be used or not going to be used, and that's important because it will influence the way you might describe the design. This would be a very different application if we were thinking of using it while climbing. I'm not thinking you would do that, but certainly in other sports that would be a possibility. Okay, so number one then is simply to read the question. You have lots of time in the exam. It's only one question, you have an hour and a half to do it. So make sure you spend a good 10 minutes, 15 minutes even, just reading the question and making notes, as I say, particularly pulling out these entities and maybe pulling out the functionality as well, so you're clear what it is this application is supposed to do. Okay, mark schemes may differ in the reformatted exam, so don't worry too much about these ones, just pay attention to the mark schemes on the exam itself that you're going to be sat in front of. The first one, which we did together a few times now in the lecture, and we've done it inside tutorials, is you're asked to draw a use case diagram. So what we're looking for here is two things really. It's correctness and completeness. By completeness I mean that every use case, which is this case for the admin actor, that we have described within the text is in your use case, and none of them are missing. If some of them are missing, it's not possible to get full marks. So it's very important that you have all the use case coverage. Also, don't get tempted to do this in one diagram. You're clearly being asked for two diagrams. Even if it feels repetitive, make sure you do two diagrams, not one. One diagram, you'll only get marked for one diagram. So for the admin actor, we know the admin actor can do things like create events, send messages, and so on. So again, as in all use cases, it's important that we only do verb phrases. Do not do nouns, otherwise you will not get a mark. So do not have the admin pointing to a use case which just simply says message, because that is not the same as send message, create message. It's just ambiguous. So you have to be very, very clear, and this comes into the correctness part of it. Your use case statements have to be correct. They have to be correct English, and they have to be verb phrases. Also, they have to look like standard UML use case diagrams. Therefore, if you're drawing associations between use cases, they have to make sense and they must be labelled, unless they're simply going from the actor to the use case, which is okay, that's fine, that's implied. But any other associations between use cases, you must say what they are. So we're after correctness and we're after completeness for you to get full marks in these sections. Okay, we've practiced them quite a bit, but I recommend strongly that you practice these again before you sit down for your exam. Okay, the next part of this particular question talks about drawing a domain model. Now again, we did this in the lecture, we walked through one of these together, and also if you have a look on Blackboard you'll see the image we created, which was just on a whiteboard, so hopefully you'll do something a little bit neater than the image I put up on Blackboard, but it does give you an idea. So how do we tackle this? It's really quite simple. All we need to do is to, as I said, look out for these entities. So we have things like message is going to be a candidate class for our domain model. We have event. We have member here as well. We may have map, for example. We have possibly weather. We have, as I say, this text, images and audio, and so on. So what you need to do here is, as we have done before, is to create a domain model. So I'll just mention again what domain models are. Domain models are class diagrams but with no methods. You're free to put attributes in there, and that can be quite useful, though not essentially necessary, but certainly is useful. As it mentions here, it just says classes and attributes. okay, but no methods. If you can't think of attributes, that's fine, don't put them in. If it's not appropriate, don't try to invent them if you can't actually think of any, because this is only an analysis model. It's just important that you get the principal domain classes down, as the sort we've mentioned. And incredibly important is you must write what the association is between them. So if you join two classes together by a line, you can have a look at the diagram again on Blackboard. You must say what that association is. And at this level, unlike a fully reversed engineered class diagram where an association may well be actual method calls from one class to another, these just need to be easily readable statements like the user member views map, for example, administrator creates message, and so on. So they're very straightforward association names that anyone looking at this domain model should be able to get a feel of what this application does very quickly and very simply. So again, what we're looking for here, as in the case of the use case diagram, we are looking for correctness and also completeness as well. So correctness, again, we are looking for a proper UML diagram. The associations must be correct. If there's aggregations, they must be correctly done. If there's multiplicity, it must be correctly done. We must have full coverage, so all the entities within the problem should be within this domain model, and all the associations should be correct. Okay, there can be some variation on this, but what you produce should be correct, and that's what we're looking for to get good marks in this section. Okay. So after we've done, really the first part of the question in this case is simply about analysis. It's analysing the problem statement above in terms of producing some simple UML diagrams of use cases and a domain model to get us going. So in this particular question here, what you're then asked to do is you're asked to discuss in detail the dimensions of mobility. Now this is absolutely crucial. You are discuss them in the context of the proposed mobile application. So it's really important that when you do your discussion, obviously the question you may see in your exam is going to be stated slightly different from this, and the marks might be different. But what's important is that you may be asked to, for example, state what this dimension is. So if you talk about location awareness, you can state it however you like. It's the ability of a device to know its location, closely association with location-based services, but essentially it is the fact that the device can locate itself over various accuracies. And then you'll be asked to discuss how this particular dimension affects the design. Okay, it's not just to talk about the dimension in the abstract, it's for you to discuss how it applies directly to this particular problem. In this case, this is about walks, it's about finding events perhaps, so you can say how you would use location awareness in the context of this application, and if you go beyond the spec in some way, that's fine as well, as long as the bare minimum is you cover what you're asked to do. But if you bring something else up that is useful in terms of location awareness, then that's great. Most of this is about using obviously a combination of mapping here, weather services, and obviously being able to locate them on a map. So that's both, it's location awareness, but it's also using mapping, and there's also a feature to be able to find climbing, as far as I can remember, climbing details which are kind of near the user, so that's a kind of locate me service, which will show other things, and other things you can think of that directly relate to the context of this design. Now, if you're wondering what the dimensions of mobility are, dimensions of mobile computing, we covered this in our opening few lectures. So this is slide 17 of lectures 1 and 2. This is version E, which I think was the latest version we was released on Blackboard. And if you look through these slides, you will see that they are listed here, which is roughly what they are, which goes on between location awareness and quality of service. Always remember that in mobile applications we consider the network to be weak. We talk about it as a weak network, in the sense it's a network that has variable quality of service in terms of connection, but also in terms of bandwidth, i.e. The speed which you can download or upload information varies greatly depending on the environment that the mobile application is in. So they're all here in these lecture notes, and these lecture notes are on Blackboard, so you can have a look at these and you can use them to help you revise, and they'll talk about various things such as quality of service and how it might impact on design, limited device capability, for example storage and CPU and so on. So these are very, very good notes to revise before you attempt questions and before you do the exam. You must be familiar with these. Okay. So returning back to our question paper, again in this particular section where you're asked about location, when you're asked about dimensions of mobility, you may be asked to describe them all, you may be asked to describe some of them, but it will be give me a description of what is this, and then tell me how this particular dimension will influence the way you approach the design. In the case of this question, we have location awareness, and then we have quality of service and the network connectivity. So really what this is saying is, how will your application handle disconnection, or how will it handle variable connection? And this influences quite a few things. It certainly influences the usage of it, so you can't rely on a connection. So you've got to think, what do I do when I'm in a good connection? Does this even matter? Has a user already realized or downloaded an event detail, and then they don't need any further connection? If they need to check weather on the day, do they need a connection? But it also can influence where you store things as well, particularly mapping. So for example, if you have a large amount of map data and your application is likely to be used in poor areas of coverage, then it's a reasonable thing to do to think about moving a lot of the mapping required onto the device. And you can do this in several ways. You can either move all your mapping. If you were thinking about UK mapping, to get that in any sort of detail would clearly take a lot of space. That'd be using things like Ordnance Survey maps, which are loaded directly on the device, or some other maps. You can decide to serve the maps when there's a network connection. You can cache maps, so you can get the user to download the maps of an area where they're going, and perhaps then do that in advance of going there, which is anticipating that they may well be poor network connectivity. In other words, you can just cache the maps and they stay permanently stored in memory. So it's not so simple, this bit. It's not just about if the user's disconnected, what happens if I'm sending a message, and what happens, how do I know a message has been sent, how do I know it's been received, and so on. But all that is part of it. Okay, this question here may come in various guises, which is about a wide variety of user interfaces and how best to develop. This is a big question, and it's quite a bit to do with the last lecture we did, which was focused on development for iOS and Android together. So that's taking a single application and then thinking how you might develop a unified design, which then splits into dedicated specialized designs, one for iOS and one for Android. So they're good notes to look at on Blackboard, really, to answer this question, because this is really what this part of the exam is asking you. It's asking what's the best approach, and the approach that was being suggested was that you adapt a generic design where you can and specialized where you need to. And if you look at that branch, that's really the fact that from the requirements and the domain modeling, you don't really need to do anything specialized. It's all very generic, even to the point of the first storyboard could possibly be generic, but it would simply have to be specialized, is because of the difference in user interface design between Android and iOS. So that set of lecture notes, which is the last lecture we did, really provides a lot of the answers to this question, and so this is really what we're looking for here. Okay, this may be answered this way, it may be asked in a different way, so you'll just have to wait and see for the exam. Limited device capability. is really about a few things. It's about RAM, it's about storage, but also it's about screen size. So don't neglect, the fact, well, modern smartphones have lots of storage, lots of RAM, so that's not really a problem. They've still got very small screens, however we look at that. So that's part of this issue around limited device capability. Again, something we've discussed in the past as well. Okay. You may be asked. This is really to do with whether you recognise the difference between native applications, hybrid applications, which is native and with web views embedded inside a native application, and pure mobile web application. So you need to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of each of these proposed application types, which again is something that we've covered inside in our lectures. So the easiest way to tackle this problem is for you to take each one of these separately in your revisions and ensure that you can come up with maybe 4 or 5 good and bad things about each application type. So you should be able to say native application is great because it takes full advantage of the iOS and all the UI interfaces, very, very powerful. Essentially do what you like with it. It can work disconnected and so on. It's bad because it's only for that platform, and so on and so forth. Hybrid's a native application. All it does is really take advantage of any existing web content, and also it can mean that parts of the application are very easily updated by simply changing the web content in a web server and so on. Pure web applications, obvious advantages are extremely flexible, will probably work on all platforms, but limited in terms of what you can do. And if you want to do very complex things, that probably ends up just as complex as doing a native application, and so on. Doesn't work disconnected, or barely works disconnected, and so on. So you have to have these kind of a good discussion on the pros and cons of each of these particular application types. As it says in there, this is exactly what this is asking you to do. It's asking you to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of both. And it also said what application types is best suited to this application. Usually this is a native application because of what you're being asked to do, but you do need to state that so you recognise that's a fact. It might talk about, could you use existing web pages? Well, that's kind of hinting at this kind of hybrid approach where you are using a native application, but inside that you have these little web pages or web panels or web views, which are simply views that you put in that behave like browsers, and you can set them to a particular URL, can be fixed. The user doesn't necessarily get exposed to the address bar at all. It's just reusing the pages, and that's great because anyone maintaining this can simply update the pages on the server in a very simple editor, content management system, and it means that the content of your application can change very easily. So there are some advantages of doing these hybrid approaches, particularly if you've already got some web content as well that you might want to reuse, as in this case. Okay. In addition to what's here, you may, because we're now down to a single question, so for example, when you look at the paper from last year, the test paper, you can pretty much ignore most of the first question, though I would pay attention to one part of it, which is the storyboarding of an application, which is what you may be asked to do. So given these requirements, there's a possibility you'll get asked a question which essentially will ask you to sketch the views, and again it's something you can have a look on Blackboard. We did this on the whiteboard in the lecture, which meant that we simply sketched these things out. We sketched the navigation between them, and we also tried to put in some feature on the views as well. Remember, what I would be looking for here is not a design for iOS and a design for Android. It would be a generic storyboard of the application. So it would be part of the design that we would produce generically before we decided to branch the design specifically for iOS and for Android. So your approach to that is various ways. It's always good to practice these things. So you can practice with this particular question. You can storyboard the views on that, which is what we did in the lecture, but you must do this yourself. It's very important that you put pen to paper when you're revising and do things exactly as they happen in an exam. You simply can't sit there and revise just reading and then expect to reproduce it in an exam. It's very good kind of muscle memory, if you like, to be able to put pen to paper and practice this. And there's a couple of questions up there. I'll possibly also put maybe another one up there as well. And the simple thing to do is just practice these 4, 5, 6 times before you sit the exam if you want to do well in it. And then also have your lecture notes for revision also. Okay, so just to summarise then, important things are to read the question carefully, pick out the nouns because you know they're going to be useful for doing your domain model, as are the verb phrases, what they do, add events, send messages. That's going to be useful for your use cases. Pay attention when you're asked to do things like a use case diagram. That again, we're looking for completeness, must be complete, and it must be correct as well. So we're looking for correctness. You'll lose marks if it's not correct. Same again for the domain model. We're looking for completeness. These model entities. So we're not doing views here. We're not doing controllers. There's no aspect of views whatsoever. This is purely the entities, and the best way to do it, as I described earlier, is to pick out the nouns from within the problem statement here. Okay, and practice that. Dimensions of mobility, if you're unfamiliar with these, because we did them at the beginning of the module run, make sure you revise those lecture notes and ask questions of the module team if you're still unsure about that. And then you'll be able to answer the next questions here. Okay. Know something about native, hybrid and pure web applications in terms of advantages and disadvantages, and also within the context of this particular problem, whatever problem you get for your exam. And also be aware that you may be asked to storyboard. In other words, you'll be asked to define all the principal views in this application and the navigation between them, maybe part of the question. And I believe that was often part of the question in part 1 of our earlier exam as well. But it's pretty much the same as what we did, which we practiced in the lecture where we were revising this particular question. Okay, and that's it for this revision tutorial. So if you have any further questions between now and the exam, then please make sure you make them. And obviously, while we're not on vacation, we will endeavour to answer those questions promptly. And very importantly, you must revise your lecture notes, and it's a good idea to revise your lecture notes whilst you are practicing at these exams. By far the best way to pass any exam is to do past exams and practice it. Practice means sitting yourself down in an exam condition, maybe with your notes at first and then without your notes, and you need to do this several times really to do well. If you do this a few times, then you should be okay and you should do well in the exam. What you don't want to do is just simply come in cold and you've not done any of this revision, and then you will struggle with this. Okay, finally, just to say I've enjoyed this small video tutorial on the exam, and just to wish you good luck with your exams in May.